If you think you know everything about Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, get ready to be surprised. Today I'm going to reveal 5 things that went unnoticed and that could totally change your view of the game. Let's agree, the journey of Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 seems like a chronicle from the most dramatic RPGs. The feeling that the game was doomed to cancellation wasn't just pessimism from the fans. It was an almost logical conclusion given the facts. When Paradox Interactive announced the indefinite postponement and, most importantly, removed the original developer, Hard Suit Labs, from the project, the silence that followed was deafening. For me, that was the moment when hope almost died. The gaming market is full of stories of projects that enter this limbo and never return. What made me most apprehensive at that time was the loss of the creative talent that was visibly passionate about the project. Figures like Brian Mitsoda, the narrative genius behind the first Bloodlines, and Kara Ellison, a top-notch writer, were dismissed. That was a gigantic blow, as it signaled that the original vision, the one sold to us in the initial trailers and demos, was being dismantled. A game can change its graphics engine, its mechanics, but when it loses its creative soul, the risk of it becoming a generic product is immense. What made me most apprehensive at that time was the loss of the creative talent that was visibly passionate about the project. Figures like Brian Mitsoda, the narrative genius behind the first Bloodlines, and Kara Ellison, a top-notch writer, were dismissed. That was a gigantic blow, as it signaled that the original vision, the one sold to us in the initial trailers and demos, was being dismantled. A game can change its graphics engine, its mechanics, but when it loses its creative soul, the risk of it becoming a generic product is immense. The turnaround, with the announcement that the studio The Chinese Room took over development, was one of the biggest surprises in recent years. It was like seeing a character you thought had died in the previous season returning for the series finale. Suddenly the game was no longer cancelled. It had been secretly rescued and was being rebuilt from the ashes. This decision by Paradox not to give up and to invest in a new team, even after so many problems, shows how much they believe in the brand's potential. From an analytical point of view, this near death completely transformed the narrative surrounding the game. It is no longer just the sequel to a cult classic. It is a survivor. This behind-the-scenes story in itself already generates immense curiosity. The game now carries the weight not only of succeeding the original, but of justifying its own resurrection. Every decision made by the Chinese Room will inevitably be compared to what Hard Suit Labs was doing. This creates a fascinating dynamic for us players and content creators. We have the chance to analyze not just one game, but 2 distinct visions for the same universe. What was kept? What was discarded? Why? The Hard Suit Labs version has become a kind of ghost, a what-if, that will always haunt the final version we will play. And that, in a strange way, makes the wait even more compelling. In the end, the fact that the game was saved from the abyss of cancellation is a victory. It demonstrates a rare resilience in the industry. Now, the question that remains is whether this second chance will be used to create something worthy of the legacy, or if the scars of this troubled development will be apparent in the final product. Hope, which was once dead, is now cautiously back. This change for me was the clearest sign that we are no longer talking about the same game. The original idea of starting as a Thin Blood was simply brilliant and perfectly aligned with the proposal of an RPG. You would be at the bottom of the vampiric pyramid, a clanless outcast forced to survive on the streets of Seattle and, little by little, build your identity and power. This rags to riches journey is a pillar of RPGs and would have allowed for incredible immersion and customization. The complete removal of this concept and the introduction of Fire, an elder vampire who awakens in the present day, turns this proposal upside down. It is no longer about a struggle to gain power, but a journey to rediscover a power that already existed. It is a fundamental change in perspective, which trades the fantasy of ascension for the fantasy of mystery and recovery. Fire is not a blank slate as a Thin Blood would be. He or she already has a history, connections, and presumably long-standing enemies. In my view, this is a very risky bet by the Chinese Room. One of the greatest strengths of the first Bloodlines was the feeling of being a pawn in a much larger game, a fledgling trying to understand the rules. By putting us in the shoes of an elder, even one with amnesia, the power dynamic changes drastically. We run the risk of losing that sense of vulnerability and urgency that made the world of Vampire so dangerous and captivating. On the other hand, I can understand the logic behind the decision, especially for a studio like the Chinese Room, known for its strong narrative. A predefined protagonist like Fire allows them to create a more focused and cinematic story. With a thin blood, the narrative would need to be more reactive to the player's choices. With fire, the story can be more proactive, revolving around this character's past and the consequences of their return. It's a different approach, perhaps closer to The Witcher 3 than to the original Bloodlines. This also directly impacts the gameplay. A thin blood would have to learn and develop their disciplines, vampiric powers, from scratch. An elder, even a weakened one, would already have access to considerable power from the start. This can make the beginning of the game more dynamic and less tedious, but it can also diminish the sense of progression. The joy of unlocking a new ability that completely changes how you play might be lessened if you already start relatively powerful. The issue of customization also worries me. How much of fire will be ours, and how much will be predetermined by the script. The first game allowed us to choose a clan that completely defined our experience. With fire, it seems that the choice of clan will be more of a memory of their past than a definition of their origin. It is a subtle change, but one that could deeply impact the replayability factor and the player's connection to the character. In the end, the swap of the nobody for the mysterious hero is the most courageous and divisive decision of this new project. I am genuinely curious to see how this will work in practice. It could be the element that gives Bloodlines 2 a unique identity and a memorable narrative. Or it could be the point that alienates the more purist fans who were hoping for a more traditional and open RPG experience. It's the kind of design choice that defines the success or failure of a game. Faction politics are the heart of the world of darkness, and Hardsuit Labs' initial approach seemed to understand this perfectly. They introduced us to multiple factions vying for control of Seattle, each with its own territories, ideologies, and missions. The promise was a complex system where your alliances would matter, and betraying a faction would have lasting consequences. It was an ambitious vision that placed political intrigue at the center of the experience, just like in the tabletop RPG. The Chinese Room, upon taking over the project, seems to have opted for a more contained and focused approach. From what has been revealed, the system of multiple competing factions has been simplified. The focus now seems to be on your relationship with the Camarilla, the dominant sect of vampires in the city. Instead of balancing between 5 or 6 different groups from the start, the experience appears to be designed to revolve around the main court and the figures of power within it. From my point of view, this is a pragmatic change that could be very positive. Overly complex faction systems can sometimes become confusing and superficial. If you have too many groups to interact with, you run the risk of none of them being developed with the necessary depth. By focusing on the Camarilla, the Chinese Room can create more memorable characters and more intricate story arcs within that structure. It's a matter of quality over quantity. This rework also fits better with the new protagonist. As an elder, Fire wouldn't be a mere recruit trying to please different bosses. Their position would naturally be more centralized, interacting directly with the city's leaders. A thin blood would need to grind and do jobs for various factions to climb the ladder. An elder, on the other hand, is already an important piece on the board, so it makes sense for their interactions to be more focused on the main players. However, there is a fear that this simplification might remove some of the freedom and complexity that fans were expecting. The beauty of the vampire universe lies precisely in its web of conspiracies and fragile loyalties. If the game puts us on a more linear path, focused on just one major faction, we might miss the opportunity to play as an anarchist, a saboteur, or a double agent, roles that are very dear to fans of the tabletop RPG. I believe the success of this new approach will depend on the execution. If the dynamics within the Camarilla are rich, full of betrayals, secrets, and difficult moral choices, the absence of other factions at the beginning might not even be felt. The depth could come from the interpersonal relationships with key NPCs, rather than the macro relationship with different groups. Perhaps the other factions will appear later in the game, or perhaps the intrigue will be more internal than external. In the end, the rework of the faction system reflects a change in the game's design philosophy. The initial vision was that of an open and systemic world, with many moving parts. The current vision seems to be that of a more controlled and deeper narrative, focused on a core of characters and conflicts. Neither approach is inherently better, but they create very different expectations. I am optimistic that a greater focus could lead to a more polished and impactful story. This, for me, is the most exciting curiosity of all. The first Bloodlines already openly flirted with the immersive sim genre, even if the term wasn't as popular at the time. The ability to solve quests using combat, stealth, persuasion, or hacking computers was already there. It was an RPG that valued player agency and multiple approaches, much in the vein of games like Deus Ex. The Chinese room openly declaring that they are leaning even more in this direction is music to my ears. A true immersive sim isn't just about having different dialogue trees or the option to be stealthy. It's about creating systems that interact with each other and with the player in emergent and unforeseen ways. It's about giving the player a set of tools, in this case, vampiric disciplines, and a setting, a well-designed level, and saying, solve it your way. Imagining the possibilities within the vampire universe is enough to get any fan excited. Think about using the dominate discipline to make a guard open a door for you, or obfuscate to pass through a security system like a ghost. How about using potence to break down a weak wall and create a new path, or animalism to send rats to distract enemies? A well-executed immersive sim design would turn every mission into a playground of supernatural possibilities. This approach also greatly values exploration and environmental storytelling. Instead of receiving all information through dialogue, a good immersive sim tells its story through the design of its environments. Reading emails on an abandoned computer, finding a hidden diary, observing an NPC's routine to find a breach. All of this builds the world in a much more organic and immersive way. Given the Chinese room's track record with narrative games like Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, I have high hopes that they will nail this aspect. The transition to a more first-person focused combat, which was shown in recent trailers, also supports this design direction. The first-person perspective increases immersion and makes the use of powers and interaction with the environment feel more direct and visceral. The idea of teleporting through shadows, running on walls, and attacking enemies from above, all from Fire's eyes, has enormous potential to be an incredible power fantasy. However, creating a good immersive sim is extremely difficult. It requires exquisite level design, an AI that reacts intelligently to the player's actions, and game systems that are robust and flexible. It is a much greater technical and design challenge than creating a more linear action RPG. The Chinese room doesn't have an extensive history with this specific genre, which raises some caution. Still, this is the direction that I believe is the most correct and respectful for a Bloodlines sequel. The spirit of the original game wasn't just in its story, but in the freedom it offered. Deepening that freedom and fully embracing the immersive sim philosophy is, in my opinion, the best way to modernize the formula while honoring the classic's legacy. If they can execute this vision, Bloodlines 2 could become a new benchmark for the genre. For a franchise with a fan base as dedicated and passionate as Bloodlines, the connections to the first game are not just a bonus. They are essential. They are the bridge that connects the old and the new, a way of telling veteran players, we haven't forgotten where we came from. The confirmation that there will be references, even if secret, is a relief and a source of great expectation for me. The beauty of these references lies in how they can be implemented. They don't have to be something blatant, like the return of a main character, although that would be amazing. They can be subtle, hidden so that only the most attentive fans will find them. These little Easter eggs make the world feel more alive and connected. They establish that the events of the first game really happened in this universe and had their consequences, even if in another city and decades later. For me, the best kind of reference is one that enriches the lore, that adds a layer of depth for those with prior knowledge. But that doesn't hinder the experience of a new player who doesn't have that background. The Chinese room has a delicate task here, to balance nostalgia with the need to create a unique identity for Bloodlines 2. If they overdo the references, the game might seem like a copy or empty fan service, unable to stand on its own. If they ignore them completely, they risk alienating the fan base that has kept the first game alive all these years with patches and mods. The secret lies in the middle ground, in respectful nods that show affection for the original material. One of my biggest curiosities is whether we will see the return of any characters. The appearance of Damsel in the Hardsuit Labs version's trailer was a moment of great excitement. Will the Chinese room keep that idea? Or perhaps they will bring back a more unexpected figure like Smiling Jack or Nines Rodriguez. The return of a beloved character, even for a small cameo, would have a gigantic emotional impact on the community. Besides characters, references can come through items, locations, or even musical themes. Finding a flyer for The Last Round Club, hearing a remixed version of one of the songs from the first game's iconic soundtrack, or reading a book that quotes a passage from Jeanette Vorman's diary. It is these details that transform a good game into a memorable experience and create a sense of continuity and belonging. In the end, the search for these references will be a kind of metagame for veteran fans. It will be a treasure hunt within the main campaign, where each discovery will be shared and celebrated in the community. This is a powerful form of engagement and a way to honor the legacy of one of the most beloved RPGs of all time. I am genuinely looking forward to scouring every corner of Seattle in search of these secrets. Well, that was the video. I hope you liked it and see you next time.